Hello and welcome to episode 56 of Bicycle Touring Talk. I am George Schlacek.
The one and only.
In this episode, I take you through the last days of my Central America tour. I had traveled 8 countries on this trip, and Panama City was my final destination before returning to Canada. We begin this story in Rio Alto, a small town that has its own airport and nearby beach resorts that differ a lot from the Panama I had experienced and fallen in love with. There's a big difference between the town of Rio Alto and its resorts. I started my day in a little budget hotel and went for breakfast at a nearby restaurant before checking out. The riding had been tough due to extreme heat and wind. On top of that, my bike was starting to show signs of serious wear and tear, but I was so close to Panama City that it made no sense to fix anything that wasn't essential to keep moving. The bottom bracket was slightly loose and the chain and freewheel were pretty bad, but it didn't affect my ride much at all at this point. It was March 27th, and I actually took a lot of photos that morning, but that was before I realized that I had forgotten to put the memory card back into my camera. Duh. Wow. The ride wasn't exactly pleasant, but now I had all the time in the world and decided to look for a place to enjoy the beach one last time. I found such a place near San Carlos. It was a surfer's haven, and I was somewhat familiar with the area because just over a year before, my daughter Jessica and I had stayed here for a couple of nights before moving on to Santiago. The village is quite nice, and there's a good mix between locals and foreigners here, but accommodation can be pricey because of the great beach that is just a short walk from here. One thing that stands out about San Carlos is the volcanic sand that is mixed in with the almost white ocean sand. It makes for interesting patterns when the wind hits it, and it gets very hot when the sun shines on it. The hostel I ended up staying at was called El Refugio. It was cheap and still not worth its price. The man running the place was young and seemed very unmotivated. He actually got quite rude when I asked about internet access. The guy had lied about it at check-in. I ended up using the internet at a nearby restaurant combined with a slightly more pricey dinner. I might have stayed in San Carlos for a second night, but wanted to get out of El Refugio after a rough night because of an intoxicated dorm mate. The idea was to cycle just a few kilometers and see if I could find another place with easy beach access. On my way was Playa Coronado, a popular town near the shore. Before I knew it, I passed the part of the Pan American Highway that had easy beach access, moved past Nueva Gorgona, and then up into the hills. I knew then that my beach time had passed as far as this trip was concerned. A bit better planning might have had me an extra 2 relaxing days in paradise, but planning wasn't my strong suit, so I was climbing hills and enjoying a beautiful landscape. It was also a trip down memory lane as Jessica, my daughter, and I had cycled here just a year before, going in the opposite direction. I passed many familiar locations but had trouble deciding where it was we had stayed over Christmas. There was a slight temptation to look around El Espave and drop in on the Caballos to say hello, but I decided to skip that because I had not contacted them at all and didn't want to disrupt their life in a rude manner. The ride eventually ended in Capira. It hadn't been planned at all, but I knew that accommodation could be a challenge so close to the city, which was now only 65 kilometers away. When someone told me about a new hostel, I decided to check it out. The place was more like a hotel with private bathroom, air conditioning, and a multi-story building. Everything was indeed brand new. There was even a flat-screen TV. Well, I had time to roam around Capira and enjoyed it a lot, especially knowing that this would probably be the last time in a long while I'd get to see a typical small Central American town. Later in the day, I sat on the little balcony of my room and watched the street down below, sipping a Balboa beer. Just across from me were two guys loading a Jesus into their pickup truck, which then wouldn't start. Those Panamanians may be religious, but God doesn't always make it easy for them. After a good night's sleep, I took my time the next morning after an early checkout. There was a great place with breakfast on the main drag, and I indulged. Once on the road that day, it became apparent that my tour was over. There were some hills, and suddenly I was on the shoulder of a 6-lane highway passing shopping malls and endless suburbs. It felt like I was in a different world. Before I knew it, I was at the Puente De Las Americas, the big crossing that was separating me from the city. This is an old bridge, and it had been the main crossing over the Panama Canal from the date of its completion in 1962 until 2004, when another bridge was built. The view from the approach is quite stunning. It seems like this bridge is not lacking in height. However, since the expansion of the Panama Canal in recent years, it is actually too low for some of the largest ships. The bridge may have to be raised in the coming years. The Panama Canal, built between 1904 and 1914, played a significant role in the history of Panama. There was no such country in 1903, as the region was part of Colombia at this time. The US helped out some rebels that year, which resulted in the foundation of Panama as an independent country, and a deal was made to lease the area of the Panama Canal to the US. The first ship passed the new canal in 1914. Since this canal passes a mountain range, it is still known as one of the biggest engineering accomplishments ever. It was only in 1999 that the canal was transferred into Panamanian control. The Panama Canal Authority has operated the canal ever since, and it has recently been expanded. Construction was underway at the time of my tour, but the new locks were first inaugurated in 2016. The Panama Canal is the country's #1 source of revenue even today. Enough about the canal. The bridge was in rough shape for cycling across. There was a sort of bike and pedestrian path at the side of it, but it was too rough to use and looked like no one had tried in an eternity. I rode the car lane, which was definitely not very safe. Thankfully, traffic was light. Once on the other side, I was in the city. My hostel was pre-booked and it was near Panama Viejo, not Casco Viejo. The original Panama had been destroyed by Captain Morgan back in 1671. Many of the inhabitants fled to the Azuero Peninsula at that time. But in 1673, the city was rebuilt at a slightly different spot. Casco Viejo is well preserved and popular with tourists, but Panama Viejo's ruins remain and can be visited as well. Today, the city is huge. It has over 5 million population, and navigating it can be challenging, not just by bike. It took me a while to find the way to my hostel, Panama by Luis. but even cars and buses get stuck in long traffic jams here. Entire city blocks were closed to traffic because of the construction of the subway that year. My last few days were in Panama City. I had a chance to explore, but also had to plan for the trip home. When leaving Canada 3 months earlier, I didn't know whether I'd bring the bike back home with me. In my mind, this was a $100 bike that I could afford to sell or give away rather than spend another $250 to get it back home. The tour across 8 countries and across mountain ranges, through rainforest and desert, had taken its toll on it. From a purely practical standpoint, it might have made sense to get rid of it and not invest anything more into it. But by now, I had become attached to that bike, which wasn't totally irrational because it is a very well-made bicycle. I decided that I wanted to keep the pink Sasquatch for future tours, but decided to outsmart the airline by packing it into a suitcase. I actually thought that the frame would fit into a large one, and so I bought one for $50 at a kind of bargain store. I definitely should have taken measurements, but instead relied on my perception. After completely taking the bike apart, it was obvious that I still needed a bike box to fit the frame. This was easy to come by at a bicycle store, but I got charged $10 for it because the store owner had caught on to the demand. Apparently, I wasn't the first cyclist to fly home from Panama. I got the smallest bike box available, thinking it would be small enough to count as regular size luggage. I was mistaken. At the airport, I had one pannier for carry-on, the suitcase, and a bike box for checked luggage. My luggage was overweight due to some bicycle parts in it, and the bike box was oversized. It was going to cost me a fortune. The solution was to get rid of some stuff. I dumped my crankset, my tent, and my sleeping bag right at the airport. It sounds ridiculous, and in hindsight, I really wonder how I had come up with my luggage strategy. In the end, I had to pay $250 just to get my bike frame on the plane. Was it worth it? I really wasn't sure at that time, but today I have to say that I'm grateful because I still have and ride the same bike. Life changed a great deal for me in 2013. After my return to Edmonton, I first landed the job with United Sports and Cycle as a bike mechanic. However, shortly after, Barbara and I decided to move in together. Since she had a well-paying job at a college in Lac La Biche, a small town in north-central Alberta, I started browsing the job postings for that area and got lucky almost right away. A rental housing enterprise was looking for a handyman, and not only was the pay better than at the bike shop, but the rent was free for a 2-bedroom apartment. I jumped at the opportunity, even when it turned out that I was expected to have a pickup truck to haul supplies and make dump runs. I hadn't owned the vehicle in over 3 years, relying only on my bicycles in the city. This job turned out to be not such a great deal after all, as the landlord I was working for was negligent in more ways than one. However, it paved the way for me to eventually start my own handyman business, which I still run today. All those changes took time. For the next 4 years, the extent of my bicycle touring was nothing to brag about. hour-long bike rides after work, and the occasional weekend adventure, Barbara and I went cycling together during the summers, and eventually Barbara became a very good cyclist herself. The bike got a major overhaul. It wasn't until the spring of 2017, though, that I got the chance to do another 3-month-long bicycle tour. Having just established a one-man business, it seemed risky to take the summer off because it is usually the best time to make money as a handyman. But 2017 was Canada's 150th anniversary. For me, it marked 30 years in Canada, and while I had been coast to coast in a transport truck, I didn't feel like I knew the country really well. At least not the way you get to experience a country as a cycling tourist. It was a bucket list item. I wanted to cycle coast to coast. Canada is the second largest country on Earth. It seemed like a huge undertaking. At the time, I didn't know how many other people actually do this ride every year, but it wouldn't have changed anything. I decided to risk my business for this trip, and looking back, there are no regrets. Life is too short to keep postponing your dreams, but that's exactly what many of us keep doing year after year. To be fair, Barbara and I were okay financially at that point. We had bought a house in 2015, and there was enough money to keep the mortgage paid for a few months. It was in mid-May of 2017 that I finally set out on the next major bicycle tour. There's a playlist on my channel that shows a ton of footage from that tour. The title is Destination Canada 150. But I've never told the stories the way I just finished telling you about my adventures in Central America. The feeling you get at the beginning of an 8,000 plus kilometer ride is exciting and overwhelming at the same time. Starting next week, I'll take you through the Canada 150 tour, bicycle touring talk style. I hope you'll join me for it. It would make my day if you gave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to see the upcoming series. In the meantime, you can sneak a peek and check out this playlist. You might want to skip past the introductions as they are excessive and exactly the same in every one. I learned a few things since making those videos. Thank you for watching. Keep watching. We're good. Yay. Yay.